Welcome back to the competition studio at the 2025 International Paderewski Piano Competition in Bydgoszcz. I'm Jared Dunn, your host, and today I am joined by one of our jury members, Professor Ronan. Thank you so much for being here with us.
It's a pleasure.
Great to have you. We've just heard the results from the second stage, and now we know the names of the 10 finalists, so I'd like to start by asking you, what are your impressions so far?
We've had a wonderful week of listening to extremely talented pianists. And one of the great things about this competition is they're given both very considerable opportunity to play, which is both a demand of the competition but a wonderful opportunity. And also, I personally like very much the great freedom of repertoire that is available. I think that's a very, very good way to program competitions. It's absolutely right to honour Paderewski, and that's been a really fascinating. I've heard several pieces I didn't know with enormous pleasure, and it's an excellent way of encouraging pianists to explore off the sort of the most popular repertoire list and find wonderful pieces that deserve to be played more. Also, it's absolutely right to have a commissioned contemporary piece, and obviously the Mozart concerto, but I like the great freedom. I don't think that, my personal view is that competition requirements should not model conservatoire examination requirements. The reality is that these guys have been through that, or sometimes are going through it, but they have covered their bases. I don't think it's our role to check that they can play something from every period, and intelligent and varied programming, which has been the case in the vast majority of competitors, is a vital skill to develop, both how to make an attractive and varied and balanced program, and indeed how to pick pieces that are good picks for you, that show you in your best light. That itself is a very important thing, particularly for pianists. The repertoire is unencompassable if you had 10 lifetimes, which is one of our great kind of blessing. But nonetheless, it means that you have to develop discernment and judgment as to where your strengths lie. So we've got to the halfway point now, hearing many 6, 7 days, I've lost count, but wonderful,
it's been a week.
Wonderful recitals, and it's an extraordinary thing. It's really very few competitions that have both a recital and Mozart concerto element in the semi-final, and experience with orchestra is a vital thing that's very hard to get for young pianists.
True.
So that in itself is a major asset of the competition. So I've enjoyed very much so far. I'm very much looking forward to what's to come.
When you think about the 10 that are moving forward, what distinguishes them?
I mean, obviously the jury, quite rightly, I think there's a common aim of genuinely trying to look for the qualities within a competitor, rather than having a template that, certainly, I'm speaking for myself, but I would imagine one way or another that they might word it differently. A lot of the jury would fundamentally agree that I'm not looking for people who come the closest to doing what I would do if I was up there on the stage. I think you're looking for people to convince you of their vision, their story, hold your attention, communicate, obviously show that awareness, understanding and empathy for the music. But it is that ability, performance is an act, is a communicative act. And so that ability to have one's attention held, to be obviously delighted and pleased, but challenged and provoked, there's nothing wrong with that. That's all part of performance. And of course, we could have picked more than 10 with no problem whatsoever, because the level has been extremely high. But I think the jury have a common aim, an unspoken aim, because quite rightly there is absolutely no discussion about things. But
so you don't influence each other.
No, there's absolutely no desire to do that, because the whole point is, this is why competitions tend to move away from discussion to systems of points, systems of private voting, because I don't want to try and convince another jury member to think the way I think. The whole value of a jury is to bring that mixture of different views, different temperaments, different empathies, but shared values, and it's a common judgment. That's the whole point,
right.
And that's as it should be. It isn't my judgment. I'm very, very happy to be part of this jury. I'm very happy to be with the jury for that. But it is more than my judgment, and that's exactly what juries should be.
Now, I'm curious to know, since you judge a lot, you have a lot of experience with this, how do you keep yourself open and ready to listen to recital after recital after recital? Your ears and your mind probably get tired of logging all the details.
Well, it's an extraordinary thing about performance that if someone has something to say, you can't not listen, I think. It is, you know, we've all had the experience where you feel tired and suddenly you don't feel tired. You know, it's, yes. I don't think, that's why I of course it's understandable. Sometimes people might think, well, I'm playing last after many people have already played the jury, but actually music doesn't work that way and performance doesn't work that way. Fantastic. You know, this is, again, it's another reason why the variety of repertoire is very helpful and important, because if you are hearing the 10th Beethoven sonata in a row. Yeah, well, I mean, as I say, I think the principle still holds that a performance that really speaks will speak, but it's helped. Of course, it's helped by the fact you're encountering, you're refreshing the experience all the time through repertoire. So, I don't think that's it's been a busy time, but certainly not a kind of. It's not been oppressive in any way at all.
In the second stage, we've heard some recitals with really substantial music. Have you been impressed by the amount of music they're able to memorize? Oh,
sure. Well, I mean, you know, entering these competitions is no picnic, you know, in terms of, which is one of the values of the competition. I mean, everybody knows that, everybody knows what the kind of philosophical limitations of the idea of music competitions is. Nobody thinks the most important thing about a competition is who wins the first prize. It is very significant and very important and gives a great opportunity to someone, but it's not the fundamental purpose of the competition. It's to give that performing opportunity, to give that exposure, and, you know, approached in the right way, which I think almost all competitors, in my experience, do. And I know, you know, I know a lot of students who go in for these things. I know a lot of, I've got experience of both sides of it. You make yourself a better pianist by simply preparing to that level this degree of repertoire. It is no small demand, which is why a jury is very, always very aware that, you know, it's whilst we all know the competitive aspect is not at the absolute centre of it, but of course the reality is if sadly you don't progress to the second stage and you've prepared a lot of repertoire that won't get played this week or next week, as it were, but still that experience will have been extraordinarily helpful for you. As you say, there's been a lot of big repertoire, a lot of very varied repertoire, and also a mature sense from the competitors that it is not simply about playing extraordinarily, apparently technically demanding pieces or very long pieces. You can be equally struck by a 5-minute work within a program. That, you know, it's again, it's the power of music, it's the power of performance, that the unpredictability of what works. There is no formula. When people say, you know, is this a good piece for competitions?
What do you tell them?
Yeah, well, I would say, as I always do, even that let's just say you looked right now, and I can't immediately remember it, but just if you were to look at the programs of the 10 people who've got through, you'd see enormous differences. That in itself would immediately destroy the myth that there's a certain kind of piece you play, and that will go. You can say in extremis that there are programs that are unwise. That's usually if they're very unbalanced or simply, I mean, to a program to some degree is like a meal. It just requires a natural balance and things playing off each other. But exactly what the kind of the menu is, as it were, is open to infinite possibilities, and that's one of the great things. And that's been very, very notable. I think I've been on competition juries. I suppose, on and off for 20 years plus. And I would say programming has got more interesting, more innovative, more imaginative. And that's very much not only a good thing, but absolutely necessary, because young artists coming into the profession now have to, you know, the core repertoire will always be core. It's there for a reason. Yes. It's survived hundreds of years.
We'll all study Waldstein.
Exactly. It's not under any threat. But you have to be able to realise that agents, festival directors, promoters, conductors, you, as you say, we'll all study Waldstein, but you can't have a career simply playing the Waldstein in the Chopin G minor ballade.
Right.
You know,
Heaven forbid the G minor ballade gets any more time.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, you cannot, for instance, these days, I think, afford to be phobic about contemporary music.
Yes.
That doesn't mean you have to be a contemporary music specialist. And there's a much bigger aesthetic range, I think, of contemporary music available now than when I was the age of when I was a student.
Right.
You know, there's all sorts of, from, you know, the musical, the various kinds of musical language that music is written in is much more wide-ranging than it was 40 years ago.
Can I unpack something there? Yeah. What has changed since you started performing and had your first agent to what agents today are expecting of?
I think enormous. When I started, my career began in the early 80s. And I would say it's probably broadly true to say that the general structure and template of things had not changed since the end of the war. I mean, that's probably a bit of an exaggeration, but not much of one.
That's fascinating.
You know, in terms of, it was very much about, in those days, you know, getting an agent. And for instance, the UK was very important to get, for instance, entree into the BBC, which did so many broadcasts and things in those days. Now I think it's come closer to where you make a career in your own image. I think what hasn't changed is the idea of level and standard, but the model, shall we say, of what makes a successful performer is, just as we were talking about the programming and everything in the competition, that's true for the persona of performers. We're entering, in my opinion, entirely healthy era, moving away from a certain kind of hyper-specialization post-Second World War that meant that in order to be taken seriously in some repertoire, you mustn't play other repertoire. You know, and Alfred Brendel used to say that, you know, he would have liked to play more Chopin, but at the time he was beginning his career, which would be early years after the war, it was a real, I mean, he said this to me himself, it was a real risk to be, as he would put it, you know, if you were seen as, you would either be seen as a Chopinist in the tradition of, you know, Courtauld and Rubinstein, or in that Viennese tradition of Schnabel and that doesn't exist now, and I think it's absolutely all to the good. I think there is there is absolutely no artistic justification at heart for that. There's only one division in life, in art, and that's between the serious people and the dilettantes, and that's a totally different division.
Where do you draw that line?
Well, I think it's very recognisable the minute you run into it. In other words, it's the difference between doing something seriously and, you know, having a go at it.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm all for, I think, you know, one thing we lack in life these days is enough amateur music making. I think it's, you know, people tend, rather as they do with sport, they tend to just watch it. They watch it done with excellence, which is, of course, a great thing to do, but also it should be, you should participate yourself. Just as, you know, it's not, you shouldn't just watch tennis at Wimbledon. It's very good for people to play tennis.
That's a wonderful analogy.
Well, the English writer, the great writer G.K. Chesterton once said, and it's a very important point, very true, but if a thing's worth doing, it's worth doing badly. Now, what he meant by that is you should not simply do things in life to which you are talented and to which you're talented. However, when you're talking about professional areas, you're talking about areas of specialism, it's important to recognise what the difference between doing something seriously and having a go at it is, you know. And I think it's, such is the level of extraordinary, you know, both the amount and the level of wonderful young musicians coming up. That I think, frankly, a dilettante would get snuffed out in reality very quickly. So, but it is very important to realise, as I say, that excellence is not defined by the narrowness of what you do. It's excellence is the quality of what you do.
Right. I have a question on that score. Nowadays, there's so many wonderful, well-trained pianists in conservatories, and you're running the Guildhall, so you tour and teach all the time. How do you identify the ones that are really special to you, that are actually ready for international competing and potentially for a big career?
Well, it's a very good question, because there's no doubt about it. That it's often said, and it's true, that the rise of level of general technical accomplishment is astonishing over the last 40 years. I think it's not at all unusual for pianists my age to say, "I'm glad I'm not starting now." It's just a wonderful, wonderful level. What is harder, perfectly possible, because these things are always possible for a real artist, but when I was young, there was still a degree to which you had to seek out music. There was no YouTube, there was no internet, there was no... Therefore, your hunger and your desire became very much a part of things. And, I mean, I don't want to paint some story of, terrible deprivation and whatever, but I mean, the point is that actually even buying records, LPs as they were then, was not cheap. You didn't just go and you like the look of 10, so buy them. You really could. So I think it was not at all unusual, my experience, and a lot of my contemporaries and previous generations, you got to know music by sight reading it. Yes. You actually got to know.
I grew up without internet as well.
Yeah, you really, and you had to. I mean, I don't want to sound kind of moralistic about it, because it's not a question of that, but you had to sort of make an effort, as you did, to go to hear performances, the problem now, and I don't blame the young people at all, I would be exactly the same, is that everything is available all the time, everywhere.
Yes.
And that is a wonderful thing on one level. I sometimes think the people who get the most out of the internet are people like us who remember life before it. And it is an astonishing thing to suddenly think, really I'm sure there's a Cortot recording, or do some wonderful concert, or you drown in the sheer availability of what's there. That presents a challenge for young artists to really, that thing of truly finding your own voice, your own way of doing things. The pressures of conformity and musical groupthink can be very great. And it's one of the tests of artistry, I think, to be able to both not simply kick against traditions, because again, that's a kind of, that has elements of just a kind of provocateur kind of thing. But to respect and take from traditions and not feel imprisoned by them. Yes. There are things, sometimes there are things that you have heard a wonderful artist do. Now, in fact, what they're doing may be totally inappropriate musically at that moment, and it doesn't make them less of a wonderful artist. They're not the definition of a wonderful, even a great artist, is not that they're right all the time about everything. It's that how they communicate is so memorable. So that ability to see and be inspired by what's truly wonderful, and not to feel that you have to have sort of camps of admiring this person, which means you can't admire that person. And there's so much to learn from everybody. And life is arguably the most important. All these young competitors have really remarkable levels of talent. There's many of them. Many who have, at one level, the capacity to have a very successful performing future. But some of the other things that come along with that are necessary, resilience, coping with setbacks, stamina, perseverance, and also one that perhaps is not spoken about so much, but is crucially important, and that is the talent to learn. Some people have enormous talent, but not always, their greatest talent is not always the talent to learn, and that is a very important talent. Because, it's a long, these young adults, they're not kids. I know there's one or two very young ones, but they've had a lot of serious experience in music, and they've they've grown up, you know, very good.
Yes.
However, that I think it's just naturally, psychologically, the hardest thing I think for any of them to appreciate is how long the career ahead of them is.
Yes.
It goes for decades and decades and decades and decades. They'll all live till they're 100, and they'll be, thank goodness they're pianists, because they can be playing till they're 98. So, you know, it's harder for, you know, that's not true for other musical disciplines. I often say to pianists, and I think it's true generally, that starting is harder, but it is a longer game.
Yes.
Because what is available to the equivalent talents, say for instance in the vocal world, classical world, they would all be snapped up by young artist programs in the leading opera houses of the world. And that doesn't mean all your problems are solved, but it gives a degree of protection, a degree of stability, a degree of very similar level string players can play some of the time in elite ensembles that then still pursue a lot of solo activity. It's harder as a pianist to begin.
Yes,
and of course, it's also true that for both musical, artistic reasons and practical reasons, that's why I mentioned about not being phobic about contemporary music, for instance. You also cannot afford to be truly developed in chamber music. And principally that's an artistic point. All the best pianists in the world are chamber music pianists. How much they do in public is a different matter sometimes, for all sorts of logistical reasons. But the idea that you could be a great musician, I mean, you know, Honourable spent so much of his early career playing with Paderewski, and you know, we forget about these things and sort of have an image of, again, it's the false idea that to be a really serious solo pianist, you would only ever play solo.
Yes.
That is artistically nonsense.
You've just hit such a wonderful nerve for me, because I studied with Latiner when I was young, and he was playing also with Paderewski and Heifetz. And several of the lessons, he said, let's put away solo for a while and just go over a Brahms trio or Schumann quintet.
I mean, there are things particularly on the piano, because all the piano's power is imitative.
Yes.
You know, as Alfred Brendel put it very well, he said the piano is only interesting when it stops sounding like a piano. And that is so true.
Yes.
You know, the piano's capacity, its greatness as an instrument, is its ability to transcend itself. That, you know, there's a kind of utilitarian use for the piano, as we know, for playing, for, you know, but for whether it's church services or whatever, you know, it has that's a function and a useful one that only the piano can do. But of course, for pianists, that's only the beginning. That's playing on the piano rather than playing the piano in the sense of that it can open up. But the opening up into, as it were, 3 dimensions is all about the imitative capacity. You know, I mean, a flute is the most beautiful sound, and a French horn is the most beautiful sound, but they can't sound like each other, but a piano can sound like both at the same time. And it's that capacity to understand that the composers don't make this division in their mind between, you know, and particularly if you go pre-Chopin, Chopin is arguably the first composer who composed, as it were, out of the piano. The piano had evolved to a level. I mean, yes, we know that the bel canto opera was a huge influence, but Chopin, you couldn't put Chopin's music for other forces. Exactly. It exists on the own. The point is, with Beethoven, Mozart, Haydn, Schubert, all this, their sound world internally is the orchestra, the string quartet, the voice, and the piano's capacity to imitate those all the time. They're never writing pure piano music. So these musicians have to have that, but both enough knowledge, enough sense of the repertoire and the sound of it going through. You can't imitate things that you can't immediately bring to your ear. And also, even particularly with piano strings chamber music, the fact that all the articulations and things come out of bowing, and there are a lot of figurations at times that for a string player there's only one way to play it. There's only one way physically it works on the instrument. Again, the danger of the piano is you can sort of do everything, including musically crazy things on it that you can't do on other instruments because the breathing, you know, the piano at base level is dangerously neutral, but that's also what gives it its great transformative you know, capabilities. So that for that reason, the experience of things like chamber music is vital. Even.
Speaking of that, we've been hearing the first 2 stages in a chamber hall, and the next stage is going to be in a philharmonic. What are the differences in acoustic here? Well,
again, it's a great question. It's a great part of the competition because we've been very, as it were, up close and personal, you know, in the way. And a test for the pianists has been controlling, you know, wonderful instruments that they have here available for the competition and all the...
It won't always look like that.
No, well, no, indeed, absolutely. But, you know, they're big-scale instruments designed to be able to play in big halls. They can, of course, work in smaller halls, that's the... But, you know, it's that side of the piano that's a sports car, and you have to know how to... Don't just put your foot down, or you'll be in the wall before you know it. And that's been a particular test. They move now in a way to another test, which is how to inhabit a bigger space, which is not simply a question of projection. And I mean, there are some matters of, you know, supporting the sound, but it isn't. It definitely isn't about just, as it were, shouting to get to the back of the room, because one of the challenges is almost all repertoire, even if it's fundamentally rhetorically large, will have considerable elements of intimacy within it.
That's exactly what I was thinking.
You have to, that has to be preserved. As I say, you can't deliver these things with a megaphone. So it's a test. Everything comes down, I think, on both whether you're dealing with the logistical problems of a large concert instrument in a smaller hall, or to projecting the essence of the music rather than simply projecting the sound into a larger hall, and that's the capacity of the player to listen. Because in a sense, you know, it's a musical maxim that I think has a lot of truth in it, where you could argue, from one sense, even more than hearing what they play, we hear what they hear. That's that capacity, to transmit. I mean, it's something that great artists have in common, that you're so held by their sense of intention that is coming orally. You can't, of course you need ideas in music. They have you can't be a stupid pianist, and because you're playing repertoire that is, you're standing alone, as it were, in front of great and demanding and profound repertoire. So there's a huge challenge for us all, which is a lifelong challenge to try and not be more inadequate than one needs to be in the face of that. But there's also just that thing of you can think about music, but you can't think music. You can only listen to music. Yes. And so your whole centre of control, of connection with the music and your own playing is through the ear. And you know, one thing I've noticed a lot this week, there's a particular quality you notice in the hall. I mean, Polish audiences are wonderfully attentive and quiet. It's not always like that by any means. They're great. There's still a different quality of listening when something really ignites. There's a, you know, which is why, as all performers know, you know, performance is a two-way process. And the more audiences realise that, I mean, Poland has this legacy of culture which. You don't have to explain this in Poland. You have to sort of, it's an argument that I think increasingly does need putting, that the audience is part of the performance. Yep. And these performers are and should be aware of the audience. It's a musical, you know, sometimes again, you can tell whether a performer is just up, concentrating and focused, or whether they are connecting. It's nothing to do with standing and smiling, though.
There's an energy there.
It's an energy.
It's
an energy of connection. It's like if you're talking to somebody, and it's just very important that they understand what you mean. That takes a lot, even if the conversation is not difficult or prolonged. It takes energy and focus. It's very different to just a casual conversation. Yeah. You know, you always hope that people know what you mean, but it's not always vital. But it's absolutely vital in this context for the sake of the music, as you know. Yeah, exactly. So that sense of energy and listening and focus, those are the foundational things that, whether in a small hall or a big hall, are about whether the music connects to the audience.
That's a fantastic point. I want to follow that up with a question that I got before our discussion. There is so much representation of competitions on social media these days, and various feelings all around the world about having really famous professors, such as yourself, on juries, and how the pedagogical process of working with talent might make it harder to just judge it one-off. How do you feel about the connection between being a seasoned pedagogue that works with these talents all the time, and then coming to a competition and judging them?
Well, I think in my opinion, what you need on juries is a balance and a mix of everything. You know, there is no... there's a perfectly good argument for having people who don't teach. No sane person would suggest that you need to teach to be on a jury. I think the truth of it is it makes you neither better nor worse. You're here as a musician. I don't feel, and I don't think this is any great mental trick that has to be worked. It's simply that you go and listen to a concert and you go and listen to a concert. The fact that you also play the piano, the fact you teach the piano, you don't listen to it as though you're teaching the person who's playing or as though you were playing it yourself. Those to me seem weirder analogies than simply listening. There's a perfectly good argument for having, in my opinion, in a proportional sense, some non-pianists on a jury. I mean, serious musicians.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because we know that inevitably there's a case for where too much attention to a certain kind of detail, you can miss the wood for the trees.
Right.
And as I say, I'm not arguing for a whole breakdown of specialisation, but most juries have room on them to accommodate that. It's not going to. It's not go. If you pick the person carefully, and I see no reason why that shouldn't be a very healthy thing. It isn't about a group of people who have this private expertise that the rest of the musical world knows nothing about, and yes, there are elements of detail, there are elements of specialisation, and there are elements of realising, for instance, is somebody ready for what might come along through winning one of these things?
Yes. Because
again, that's what tends to, it's a wonderful thing to win a competition, but it's the start of the next phase of a journey, which has all its own demands and problems. They're nice problems, and they're ones that's very, but they're still problems. They're still, the challenges of success are just as real as the challenges of disappointment.
Of course, and some of these, we were talking about this somewhat before. What conditions exist here at a competition that are different from, let's say, the first 2 years of concert tours?
Well, obviously, the fact that people prepare for these things very seriously because you have to. It doesn't matter how talented you are not just going to turn up and do them, because to have all these pieces in shape, these guys who we've just put forward now are in 48 hours playing a recital in a Mozart concerto, and as they themselves would feel, it's going to have to be good. Yes. So it's got to be ready. What they're doing now at this stage is much more preparing themselves to perform, not preparing the repertoire.
The pieces,
So you obviously, and the very fact that there is quite a big demand, well, it's not quite a big, it is a big demand in this competition, is in itself a healthy thing, because you can't, the danger sometimes of a certain kind of conservatory training is you prepare one program a year and feel that's giving you some picture of what it is like as a performer. And
it just isn't that.
It isn't. The unexpected comes, which is why I'm having to learn a piece, a contemporary piece that you don't choose to learn, but you have to, is an exact replica of things that will come at you in concert live. The unexpected, the ability to react quickly, because for many young performers, some important occasions, I know for myself, are where you stand in for somebody. Someone gets sick and you jump in. That capacity to react quickly. So I think most of that's why I would always say to, I say for instance to students and to anyone else that you've got to prepare seriously for a competition. What I don't think you should do, though, is freeze the rest of your life and activities and everything else for 6 months beforehand just for that competition. Because we do know that competitions are not an exact science. Nobody ever claims they are. And you can never guarantee, sometimes you will feel you've played better and not been successful, and feel you've played worse and are successful. And this is, which again is a mirror of concert life in terms of the.
That's true.
So you have to, as I say, you have to understand the difference between being seriously ready to do a competition, to do this particular competition with the repertoire, but you also have to keep other things going. You have to be learning new repertoire. One of the most important things for pianists, I think if you ask almost any pianist, they will talk about how crucial that body of repertoire they learned before they were, say, 35 or something.
Oh, yeah.
You go on learning all your life, and you hope on one level you learn better, but you almost always, everyone would agree with it, learn slower. It's like everything, like it's learning languages or anything else.
There's a tipping point,
yeah, there is I think it's very, very important for young pianists to really learn repertoire. One, we were talking again about the challenges, and this is a challenge also doing competitions. And this is perhaps the toughest challenge for those people who are understandably at a point in their career where they're doing a number of competitions, and the temptation is, and there's a balance to be struck here, because you have to play pieces that are strong for you. On the other hand, you have to be careful not to get trapped into simply playing pieces that have worked for you before and not expanding your repertoire, because that will be something you very much regret in the future.
Why might that be a regret? Some people would probably think, well, that makes sense, you know, enter a competition, only play what you know is going to be perfect, and then worry about the future if the future happens.
Well, you have to realize some of the differences of reality in the competition. You know, here, for instance, there's with certain requirements, but generally a great deal of flexibility and freedom in the program, which I applaud greatly.
You like this?
Absolutely, but you also have to understand that when some recital society invites you and you say, that's wonderful, and I want Schumann Carnival, I say, well, that's very nice, but unfortunately we just had that, so
yes,
you know, it won't work like that. And even more so, of course, in concertos, you know, where you're very, very rarely given much choice at all, you know, let alone carte blanche. So you've got to have things up your sleeve. You've got to have things you're working on. You've got to be developing this. It's so important, and it's not an easy balance, because, as I say, at the same time you can't just be throwing. You can't just be putting pieces on for things like this that you kind of hope you've got learned. So it's
right. There's a delicate balance there.
But that in itself, I think, mirrors the demands, the very considerable demands. You know, performing careers are hard. They're not, and
to put it mildly.
They're not so much hard. Well, I mean, they're hard for all sorts of reasons, as we know. You know, but the point is the things that might not be always publicly visible, like this. That, you know, sometimes even in competitions, people say, I don't understand why they played that piece. It may be for sometimes people had to, because they have a recital commitment. After competitions don't exist in a vacuum. These people are and should be doing other things as well, and sometimes, you know, you have to find that balance and strike that balance. That's
wonderful to hear, because, you know, we watch these and see, you know, there's disappointment in people who don't move forward, and wonder, you know, is the jury simply closed off to certain things? For example, they don't like the program. They arbitrarily really dislike a piece. But it seems like you're quite open to the fact that this is not the only thing in their life at the moment. And
of course, it's, you know, this will be a very... Coming to a competition like this will be a very central focus for all of these people. As I say, nobody does it casually, but that doesn't mean they haven't got other serious things going on, and that the competition, it's the job. You know, in the musical, you know, ecosystem, competitions are a part of that, and a very significant part of that. But nobody should view competitions as the totality of their performance engagement. You know?
You've just answered my next question. What would you say to those who might be disappointed at the moment about the results?
I think, firstly, allow yourself to be disappointed. It's perfectly natural, healthy, and you know. I mean, in other words, you don't. I think what I would particularly say to people is, don't immediately say to yourself, "Well, what did I do wrong?" Because you didn't necessarily do anything wrong. It's the jury. For this stage in the competition, for instance, what we've just concluded, we had to pick 10 pianists. The jury, I'm sure if the jury had been told you can have 14 pianists, and then nobody would have said, well, no, we got. It has to be 10. You're making a choice. You're making, in that sense, an artificial cutoff, because it has to fit into the, you know, the realities and templates of how many people can play a Mozart concerto with orchestra rehearsal. There's reasons for all these things.
Yeah.
But so, as I say, we're talking about the talent to learn. It is very good and very important to use competitions in this way, where you, by all means, you know, feedback, I think, is often a very helpful and very useful part of these things. I tend to, if I'm giving feedback to a competitor, I'm more interested in talking to them about their playing, and if I feel there's something particular and specific, whether it's programming or something, that they could think about, I will certainly let them know. However, feedback is not for me about explaining why you didn't get through.
Yeah.
I think to see it.
Ironically, it's the first thing on their mind, right?
Well, that's natural. It's human nature. But on the other hand, I think most of these young people are actually very sophisticated. In my experience, I've done a lot of this. I've been in a lot of feedback sessions, and overwhelmingly, people are remarkably. Firstly, remarkably gracious in the sense that it's a disappointment, but equally, they're as I say, they're not kids. They're young, but they're not done. They realise that, something a lot of competitions have started doing, which I think is an extremely good idea. Actually, it was on the Rubinstein when I did, and on the Montreal international competition, is having a junior jury, and that's actually a very good. Usually, conservatoire students from the area, and they, of course, they're not formally part of judging the competition, although sometimes I think there's a discretionary junior jury prize, which I think is an entirely legitimate thing to have. And when I talk to them afterwards, they all say how interesting it is, because you kind of realise that once you're having to do it, you realise the multifaceted nature of how to do it. You realise it's simply not a question of saying I like you, but I don't like you, and I like you. It just isn't like
will be.
And they would do exactly the same, because juries are not. A jurist is not a sort of magical species. They're just musicians trying to bring a fair, open, balanced judgment. And I would always stress that. This is why the value of a jury as opposed to individuals is so important, because I've been on a lot of juries over the years, and I've had many occasions where in the first round someone who either I haven't put through or I haven't, personally I haven't necessarily voted through, but later in the competition I've been very grateful to the wisdom of my colleagues for hearing things that I missed. This is, one shouldn't. It doesn't help the situation to pretend nobody's acting in a state of omniscience in these things. You bring, just as performers do, they do their best. Juries do their best. And performances are not perfect and juries are not perfect. And they do. And that sense of that's why the communality of a jury is so important.
There's collegial support there.
It's collegial support and learning opportunities for juries. I'm not just talking about, it's not only competitors that need to keep their talent for learning. You do as a jury, that's the most key talent of all, in my opinion, is the talent to learn.
Just based on saying that, I'm sure every single student who works with you is quite grateful. That's a very special quality in a teacher, to be committed to that.
I think we are all, the cliches are all true. We are all students. It's not a kind of mock humility. I mean, it's just, everybody knows that any serious person knows you go on studying music all your life, and you constantly are learning, constantly aware of things that you didn't realise. Kierkegaard, the philosopher, said that life can only be lived forwards, but only understood backwards, but has to be lived forwards. Yes. And that is music's a great teacher of these things, because it exists in such a heightened real time that it really connects you with the moment. And often you have to just simply look back and say, well, I'm more aware of certain things now than I was then, and I'll try to bring those to bear going forward. And 10 years' time, you'll be aware of things one's not aware of now. So that process of learning and communal learning is the thing that really binds everybody, competitors, jury, and everyone else together. So, the element of disappointment, which, as I say, is particularly understandable.
You don't enter a competition hoping to get eliminated.
You don't, and there are also practical realities. People are paying to travel here. They're paying. We're talking a lot about certain kind of ideas that I think are actually very, very important in practical terms. But juries and competition directors are also intensely aware of the time, the sacrifices, competitors are making. And so, of course, that's why it's so important candidates are treated well, treated properly, treated with dignity, treated with respect, and because they are putting a lot into this. Just to come here and prepare all that repertoire, make the effort to come, the expense of coming. It's a big thing to do, but it is important to view a competition. This is why it's so important not simply to see the terms of getting through or not getting through. Important though that undoubtedly is, I sometimes say to students that another aspect of these competitions, which this may sound a little kind of left field, but I think it's very important, is they function in a way like conferences. They are where you meet your colleagues who are going to be your colleagues. We were talking about how long this profession is. There's many people, you know, in 50 years' time, some of these guys will be looking back on the fact they first met here, you know, and there are. It's important for competitors when they go, and I say this knowing how much focus you have to have. Of course, I'm not suggesting you go and make it a kind of orgy of working the room. I don't mean that, but I do mean that you do connect with other people, you listen to other people, and for pianists particularly, this is a challenge. But I mean, a challenge by which I mean we're not forced into communality as much as other musicians are.
We practice alone all the time.
We practice alone. We spend a lot of our lives alone, and you have to be. Careers, including very big solo careers, are not as solitary as people think they are.
That's true.
You're going to be working with agents, you're going to be working with concert promoters, conductors, blah, blah, blah. You know,
left hand's looking at bass, right hand is on the phone with your manager.
Exactly. Well, you have to be able to interact. And that doesn't mean you've got to be a party animal or you've got to be, but it does mean if you're someone to whom people can't relate, I mean, I have known people, sadly, over the years who are very, very talented and have not had the careers they should have because people just couldn't work with them.
Yes.
And you will have to work with people. And it's interesting how, you know, you see time and time again when you do come across musicians at the top of the profession, in huge majority of cases, they're a model of professionalism and, you know, this idea of the kind of the diva screaming the building down or something is actually it isn't like that.
That wouldn't be sustainable on someone's
they're
career.
just that sense of professionalism and goes and integrity. It's deeper than just professionalism, but professionalism is part of it. So, and indeed just knowing how to relate, learn from, empathise with, and get inspired by, and you know, build contacts in the right sense of the word. I don't mean that you know because that is all part of having a career. And
the music world is very small.
It is indeed.
Everybody on some level knows someone who knows someone else.
And there's no better, you know, because inevitably a lot of the lives of pianists run along a certain kind of parallel track because a great deal of time people are alone in their individual practice rooms in their countries. Then an occasion like this is a great bringing together of extraordinary people of wonderful talent, wonderful shared values, empathies, and great sense of, you know, similar desire of the level they're attaining and the level they're aspiring to, and you want to meet other people like that. So it is all part of it.
That's a wonderful thought. Just to quickly close, are you looking forward to the next stage and the repertoire it's going to offer?
Very much. Well, as I say, it's if not quite unique, it's very rare, really very rare, to have this kind of double-pronged semi-final. It's a wonderful thing. It's a huge undertaking, financially, logistically, everything else for the competition. So I chapeau to them for that. You know, it's a and it is very fascinating because it's all these facets of a performer's personality that are being not just tested, but they're being given the opportunity. As I was saying earlier, you know, concerto experience is very hard to come by.
It is.
You know, there's a lot of wonderfully talented young pianists who've never played a concerto with an orchestra.
Especially a fine chamber orchestra. That's
absolutely
very rare.
Absolutely true. And the experience of playing concertos with second piano, while it's absolutely necessary and has a clear value, also has clear limitations. You know, it's a big shock when people come to play with an orchestra the first time because these kind of, you know, for instance, you know, the immediacy with which a piano speaks.
Yes.
Orchestras don't do, you know, the first experience most people have when they play with an orchestra feels like you're pulling an elephant around the room. I don't mean that critically, I just mean you have to adapt to a whole different sense, spatial sense of how the sound is produced. Again, something that's actually very valuable for pianists is the piano is the only instrument you can play a note with no preparation whatsoever. You know, it just doesn't exist. You're not really playing a note, you're just kind of striking a note. But learning the time it takes an orchestra to produce a sound, a chord, and that is the right, that is the organic speed of music that it should be. It's pianists who, again, have to learn how to breathe like that and learn how to do it. But the experience of actually doing it with an orchestra is so valuable for that reason, you know. So, I'm looking forward hugely.
Do you enjoy Mozart in general?
Oh, sure, yeah. I mean,
Mozart.
who doesn't, you know? And you know, that combines, you know, a lot of competitions have a chamber music element, which is a great thing. In a sense, a Mozart concerto combines both those elements, because all the mature Mozart concertos are concertos for piano and woodwind. You know, that's how Mozart conceives of them. The piano interacts as in dialogue all the time, particularly with the woodwind. So someone's not only soloistic presence and capabilities, but their chamber music awareness and will be crucial. There's simply no way you can play a Mozart concerto without that.
As you were saying, all the greatest pianists have been wonderful chamber musicians.
Yeah,
you just can't avoid that.
You play chamber music with yourself, in effect, on the piano. That's what you do alone. But you know, that's why however much, you know, these wonderful musicians they'll be very aware of all these kind of things we're talking about the musical demands, but having the physical experience of doing it is so valuable and so useful, because, you know, there's certain sensations that you realise and that you can then memorise, which is what you bring, because sensation is a sensation is always more powerful in its immediacy than just an idea.
Yes,
you know,
absolutely.
you might forget a law of thermodynamics in physics, but you don't forget what it's like to burn your hand. You know, and performance operates more at that level.
Yes.
It's elemental. It's very so. Just knowing what it feels like. So in that sense, all of the semi-finalists will be winners. You know, just going. Sadly, only 5 can go through, but 10 of them will be having a truly wonderful learning experience apart from anything else.
Ronan, thank you so much for your time today. It's been great interviewing you.
Pleasure.
Thanks for being here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you everyone for watching today's competition studio. Tomorrow we'll take a break, and then we'll see you the following day for the first studio during the semifinals. See you then.
The 13th International Paderewski Piano Competition in Bydgoszcz, Poland. November 9th to 23rd. Watch live broadcasts online. More information at paderewskicompetition.pl and on social media.
Bydgoszcz. Jedno miasto, 2 rzeki, 1000 historii.
Energia jutra zaczyna się w umysłach, które sięgają dalej. Energia jutra to bezpieczeństwo, rozwój, niezależność, wielkie inwestycje dla pewnej przyszłości. ORLEN to więcej niż przystanek na drodze. To droga. Energia jutra zaczyna się dziś.
Stadiony, baseny, muzea, opery, te i wiele innych obiektów powstało ze środków przekazanych przez Totalizator Sportowy. Od 1994 roku przekazaliśmy na te cele ponad 22 miliardy złotych. Totalizator Sportowy, właściciel marki Lotto.
The 13th International Paderewski Piano Competition in Bydgoszcz, Poland. November 9th to 23rd. Watch live broadcasts online. More information at paderewskicompetition.pl and on social media.
Cukiernia Sowa życzy Wam słodkiego dnia. Codziennie.
13. Międzynarodowy Konkurs Pianistyczny imienia Ignacego Jana Paderewskiego w Bydgoszczy.